Good morning. We thought we'd give you a little extra time to mingle. It's the last day, right? Last morning. So this has been an awesome meeting, conference. I think the team has done a really good job, the planning team. So, and great turnout for you all to come in. This is what makes it right here, right? All right, so our first session this morning and last session today of the conference is on stream morphology and sediment transport. We have 4 presenters today. You all know that. You've looked at your schedule. But so our first speaker today is Steve Griffin. He's the hydraulic engineer covering northern and eastern Colorado. He served for 14 years in the Colorado DOT. He holds his master's in hydraulics from the Colorado State University and is currently pursuing his PhD, hoping to research post-wildfire hydrology and recovery from a DOT perspective. So next in HEC, you'll probably be addressing him as Dr. Griffin, hopefully. That'll be good. But anyway, Steve.
All right, well, thank you. And thank you, everyone. I know, as we mentioned, it's last morning, and you all have persevered, as they say. So thank you. This conference, I think this is my 4th one, and never ceases to amaze me the rigor of the presentations that we have here. So thank you for everyone who presented or participated in conversations this week. It's been truly fantastic. I'm here to talk today about morphodynamic modeling of a gravel bar formation at a bridge replacement. And this did not start out as a research project or as a potential presentation. This was just a bridge replacement that we did as a DOT. And I feel like I'm just far enough, those 14 years in my career, where something that I actually designed and took responsible charge for is now coming back to bite me. So maybe a couple of you no, it's not biting me, I'm learning from it. And which is good, because we should learn from our designs, and we should be able to teach the lessons that we learn as practitioners and designers to the next generation. So I know a few of the folks in the room are from Fort Collins. That's where I hail from, Fort Collins, Colorado, and people are going to recognize this bridge crossing. This is called the Kashlaputa River. It flows right through the heart of Fort Collins, Colorado. And State Highway 14 is there in the middle of your screen going west to east. This was a bridge replacement that we designed in 2013, 2014, and then they built in 2015 and early 2016. Now, when you look at the previous as-built plans for the bridge that used to be here, you're seeing the new improved bridge there in this graphic. I'll show you the old one here in a moment. But you see the water treatment plant off to the northwest of this picture. That didn't used to be there, of course. And so the river used to hug about a 45 degrees straight to this crossing. And when we pulled the as-built plans, when we were first designing the replacement structure here, we wanted to get a sense of, well, how has the stream changed? What have been the geomorphology of this area? And of course, some of you might relate that literally what we found was a note with a single line with some stationing that said grade to slope. So that was the extent of our pre-project engineering that we could get our hands on. What we noticed is when we replaced the old bridge with the bridge that you now see in the picture, which is quite a bit wider, so it's got more lane area, and it's also longer from west to east. So it's by every account a larger structure to accommodate the floodplain and the floodway. And but what I've outlined here in red is a gravel bar that began forming almost immediately after the replacement bridge was installed. And so the formation of this gravel bar back in 2016, 2017, 2018, and obviously till now, led us to a number of questions about this site, because we did not anticipate this gravel bar being here. And the gravel bar, by all accounts, was not there, at least in the way that it looks now, when the previous bridge was demolished and our grading took place. So it led us to a number of observations and a number of questions. But let me orient you a little bit to what we're seeing. In both of these photos, we are standing upstream, looking downstream. And of course, you see our bridge opening there in the front of the photo. And off to the right, in the right bank, that's our gravel bar. And if I was to describe the composition of this bar to you, mostly gravel. Obviously, if you dig down, you're going to start to find a lot of sands underneath that gravel. And we do have some cobble, but I would not call this area armored. If we go a few miles upstream, it is actually almost completely armored. And in fact, if you've seen the Federal Highway scoping videos that they put together a couple years ago, the AIRS team is standing just a few miles upstream from here. And at that point, the channel in this river is fully armored. Here, not so much. And then this is the view under the bridge footprint. And something really curious to us, and I'm not really going to focus on this today, but it's someone in the room will probably have insight on this, is you can see that we're starting to get some gravel accumulation around the piers, but when we get to the bridge footprint, the gravels largely disappear and it becomes much sandier, and we lose that top layer of gravel. And then when we get back to the downstream, it becomes gravel again. Again, I'm not really presenting on that part because, quite frankly, I don't understand why that's happening. So let's hop in our drone in the middle of summer. This is taken just a few weeks ago. And there on the right, you're going to see the beginning of our gravel bar. This gravel bar is about 400 feet long. There's our new bridge. And there's the termination of the bar. Again, hopefully no one gets motion sickness as we continue downstream. Then we have another crossing, which is a city street and a pedestrian bridge, and then we continue downstream. As we look at the general plan form of this stretch of the Poudre River, we do have alternating bars, although I say alternating bars, they don't necessarily alternate from one bank to the other. Sometimes you'll have islands in the middle, sometimes you'll have the right over bank or left over bank will have several bars in the row, while the other bank really doesn't have any accumulation. And obviously on the outside of a meander bend, of course, you're going to have some accumulation there. This is the way the site looked way back in 2012. So this was just as we were beginning to do our initial design on this site. And again, the red triangle, or red triangle, it is early on a Friday. The red rectangle is the outline of the current day gravel bar. And so you can see there are certainly gravels and sands underneath there, but it's a very stable, very well vegetated bank. But we're really not seeing anything that looks like a gravel bar there. And this is that exact same view actually in October of 2016. So this is only about, well, this is as the bridge was actually finishing up. You can see the planters in the middle of the bridge have not even been installed yet. So the grading was done in late 2015, so the grading had already been done, and the contractors were no longer working in the river at this point. They were finishing up the deck itself. But this is the way it looked only months, really, after the grading in the channel had been complete. So this led us to a couple questions, and I'm going to tell you right now that this study is very much ongoing. What we're hoping to do is package up this study and submit it to peer review at some point in the future. So I'm not going to be able to answer all of the questions definitively today, and I'll have a slide here at the end that kind of leads us through, well, what are we going to do next? Because there's a lot of next steps here. But I wanted to put this in front of you because the methodology that we're using to do this study is through SRH2D, and we're really relying heavily on that sediment transport module within SRH. So I wanted to show you how we were approaching this question and what questions the question itself was leading us to. So first of all, can this gravel bar formation be predicted or replicated using a 2D morphodynamic model like SRH2D with sediment transport? This was just at the point in my career, this was one of the very last bridges that I did using HEC-RAS 1D. So this would have been 2013, 2014. SRH is around. I took the training with Scott in 2015, I believe, for SRH. So I was very much reliant on 1D. The FEMA regulatory model was 1D, so that's what we did. But if we went back in time, and let's say we had the same technology back then that we were relying on as practitioners, could we have predicted or replicated this behavior on the front end of our design? Because we certainly did not anticipate it at the time. And number two, can we maybe understand what recurrence flows or what type of events might influence the bar formation in this system? And so being a Friday morning, here are some fun facts about gravel bar formation. Two people thought that was funny. When we did our literature review, and we're still ongoing here, but when we did our literature review for this question, a number of factoids sort of presented themselves. One is that apparently it's much easier to predict on the front end, on the design end, the length of a bar such as this, rather than the amplitude. So if we're going to run this through SRH2D or any morphodynamic model, we might have a little better result estimating the length of the bar than perhaps the amplitude. But obviously we're going to try, and we're going to see how close we get. Another thing that came out, actually Peter Nelson at CSU had pointed this out to me, is that it's really those unsteady flows. When we talk about gravel bar formation, it's really those unsteady flows that are going to if we're trying to model and replicate that, we really need to be routing unsteady flows. And we want them to be as realistic as possible. We're very fortunate at this site that we have a USGS gauging station not even a mile upstream, and there's no really significant inflows that come in between there and here, no significant diversions. So really we're getting an excellent record of the stream flow at this location, which isn't common for us. We don't have a lot of examples of that. So another thing to point out just that came to light in our literature review is that there's a number of other examples in the literature of something like this. So for example, there's a river called the Arc River, and I'm probably not saying it correctly. It's in France. I took Spanish. But this river, the Arc River in France, very similar. There was a 2015 study that came out, and they were in almost a very similar environment to the Poudre here in Fort Collins. Gravel with some cobble on top and sands beneath. And what their engineers had done is they had basically regraded the longitudinal slope. They had set their slopes of the banks back, replaced a bridge with a larger structure, and within 3 years, they said, they had full stable formation of alternating gravel bars. So it was within a very short amount of time. That doesn't necessarily translate exactly to our site because I'm sure there are different variables there, but there is some precedent for this happening. This isn't the only spot in the world where this happens. So some essential facts, the Cache la Poudre River flows into the South Platte, which then becomes the Platte, which then becomes the Missouri, and so on. We mentioned already gravels and sands, a little bit of a cobble layer on top. The longitudinal slope around 0.5%, so it's fairly steep. The mouth of the canyon is some distance upstream, but you can see it almost from the bridge, so not terribly far. And the typical high flows, as typical in Colorado for this part of the world, is from the spring runoff. So that's really what's driving. If we get high flows, it's typically during that snow melt period of time. So, and to this point anyway, we've been using SRH2D version 13.1. Obviously, we'll be upgrading that as we move forward, but that's the version that we started our model in, so we wanted to keep it consistent, at least to this point. We set up our mesh. 24,500 elements is what we went with. Certainly, we'll be looking as we progress. Some of these elements will probably not be needed, and we'll look to trim this down as much as we possibly can. One of the things I'll talk about in just a moment is because we're routing quite a bit of flow through this model, the run times are long, and that's actually, we were hoping to have a little bit more results when we came here today, and the run times are such that it makes that difficult. But we're going to trim some elements down and optimize that as best we can. Back in 2015, so this would have been right about the time that the stream grading was being worked on. There was a significant event in the Poudre, and you probably can't read that, especially from the back, but this is a real-life storm event that our USGS gauge recorded, peaked out just around 3,000 CFS. And so this was over the course of about 10 days. And so what we said was, well, let's take this real-life storm, because it starts at a typical low flow, it goes up to that peak, and obviously then we have a pretty good trailing limb coming down, which is also very important when we're trying to model something like gravel bar formation. We want to make sure to get that trailing limb as well as the rising limb. And we'll take the 10-day event and we'll put that as our unsteady flow into the model. And that's exactly what we've done there with our boundary conditions. Also, because we did a bridge replacement here, we have quite good boring data. Unfortunately, again, we weren't anticipating on doing a research project when we did these borings, so they're all around the bridge and the roadway embankment. So they don't go upstream, they don't really go downstream. So this is definitely a big assumption we're making, and we'll probably want to re-examine this assumption at a certain point is, does this boring information translate very well to the area that we're actually concerned with here, especially in the upstream end where this bar is forming. But as you can imagine, a lot of gravels, sands, and then you hit a shale layer. So we're trying to replicate that information in SRH2D using our different layers that we can use with our sediment materials coverage. And then for each of those layers, we're then putting in the gradation, which you can see on the bottom left. And that's based on, again, our boring log, the best data that we have. And we're also going out there and doing some by hand Wallman counts and just kind of digging into that subsurface and seeing what we find. Uh-oh. Come back to us. There we go. Now, this is where we start experimenting. This is, for us, the fun part. We've got everything set up, and now the question becomes, well, what equation or equations do we rely on? So we've tried a couple. We've tried the Meyer-Pierre-Mueller, and we've tried the Yang sand plus gravel equation, just to compare them, just to kind of see with that one sample event, what kind of results do we get? Does one lend a little bit more towards something that we're seeing in real life versus the other? So we're going to do separate runs using the exact same data, but just use these two different equations separately. And this is what we find with that 10-day event as we route it through our sediment transport model. On the left, obviously, you've got your Meyer-Pierre-Mueller, and on the right, you've got Yang. These are just accumulations. I'm not showing any erosional. So as opposed to a lot of what we've been talking about this week, we're obviously concerned about scour and erosion. Here, we're actually concerned about aggradation. And different scales as well. And what we'll see here in the cross sections is we'll be able to look at the differences between these performances. So let's start, we're just looking at this is the pre-project 2013 survey. So this is before we touched this. We were just starting design. This is what the cross section looked like immediately upstream of our bridge where this gravel bar is forming. And those red lines are denoting the extents laterally of the current day bar. And now we've added this brown line, and this was our engineered cross-section immediately upstream of the bridge. And this was arrived at in consultation with a multitude of stakeholders. So this wasn't just me, it wasn't just our geotech folks, it wasn't just our bridge designers. We had the city and CPW, our Parks and Wildlife folks, and all kinds of people involved in coming up with this section. And the decision was made at that time, well, let's keep that low flow channel up to the 2-year event more or less intact for fish passage and aquatic organisms. And then we're going to start laying that benching back. This is where I'm talking about I'm learning. I wouldn't do this today, especially in this system knowing what I now know. But back then, all the stakeholders are kind of coming together. Everyone's sort of agreeing, yes, let's lay this back, let's bench it. That was the trend. Let's bench it, and then we'll tie it in there on the right. And that's what we did. This is what we built. Now, I've got that engineered cross-section in here, and I've added the Meyer-Pierre-Mueller results. And again, this is for a very short amount of time, and I'm going to talk in just a second about how we're going to progress forward from that, because that's obviously not enough time to truly replicate what we see there today, because it's been, 6 years now. But you'd see the Meyer-Pierre-Mueller, it's shallowing up that main channel by just a little bit. And between those two red lines where we've seen the gravel bar forming, we are seeing a bar. Now, when we go back, you can see that does not extend for that full 400 feet of that bar. And we would not expect that because we haven't run 6 years worth of data. We've only run a single 10-day event. So we're not getting that full length predicted from the model. But we weren't necessarily anticipating that at this point. But we are seeing what could be construed as a bar starting to form there. And now we've added in the Yang sand and gravel result. Yang comes in real aggressive, and it goes way down and it goes way up. Now the result in the channel, I didn't even include the bottom part, and part of that is probably we probably did not correctly tell SRH, hey, there's a shale layer there that you can't really go beneath. And I think Yang, we forgot to tell Yang that somehow, and Yang just wanted to go and go and go. But you can see the accumulation. Actually, it's interesting, the accumulation in what we're calling the bar area is actually more or less replicating what was there before the project even started. I would say the Meyer-Pierre-Mueller, when we walk the site and when we look at aerial photos, is much more closely probably replicating what we're seeing in real life. But again, we've only run 10 days of record, so we have to continue this. That's why I say we're still baking. So what are we going to do down the line? Well, first of all, we've already done this part. We actually did this summer. We had a stage gauge and we had a time-lapse camera, and we recorded the entire spring runoff season, and we then used that water surface elevation data with the recorded flows upstream to calibrate our 2D model, now in the static condition, obviously. But we calibrated our baseline model with those elevations throughout the spring months so that we can correlate flow rate to height and get a good correlation there. So we've already done this part. The next thing we're going to do, and we have to kind of wait for the vegetation to die down or become dormant this winter, is we're going to do a full survey of that bar area this winter, and then we'll plug that into our model, obviously as kind of the end condition for winter of 2022. And then we're going to take all of that data, and we're going to start in 2015, and if we can swing it, and our computer doesn't start smoking, we're going to take it all the way to 2022, and let's run that entire sequence of good data, and let's see what we can get out of there. Let's see how close we get to the bar that we now see there today. And is there anything unanticipated? And this is an important question for us, one that came up as we were thinking through this is, well, we took a small 10-day sample just because it's manageable, right? But let's say we run that 10-day, it'll come back. Yes. Let's say we run that 10-day, we run the 6-year of record, and they're not that different. Well, that would be really interesting. Or let's say we run the 10-day, we run the 6 years, and they're nowhere near the same. That's also interesting. So either way. Conclusions such as they are, as we say, we're still very much in progress here. Meyer, Peter, Mueller, and Yang are both predicting some sediment accumulation in our area of interest at the bar formation. As I say, Yang comes on really aggressive. MPM seems to be much more in line with what we might expect. Running this morphodynamic model for a longer period of record might increase the reproductivity of the bar and point to the best sediment transport relationship for the system. And finally, please, that's way too much text for, I don't know what I was thinking, putting that much text on here, but the bottom line for me as a practitioner, something I'm taking away from this, and this is something I've known for a long time, but this study just helps reinforce it, is, you know, we look at those FEMA flows, the 10-year, 50-year, 100-year, 500-year. Our 10-year event here is in the 5,000s, 5,000 something CFS. The peak flow we ran here was only 3,000 CFS. And we're already seeing accumulation in the area of our bar. So not even a 10-year, maybe more like a 5 years, what actually seems to be triggering this sediment accumulation. And with that, questions? If we have any questions.
Questions for Steve?
Yeah.
What time step are you running for sediment transport?
That is an excellent question. I would have to pull open the model and refresh my memory on that. I believe, now I'm going off memory, I believe it was a half second. But I would want to refresh my memory, and I'll get you that. Yeah, Charlie.
So how would you have designed this?
Sorry,
How would you have designed this?
I've been thinking about that. You know, I think the biggest change that I would have made had I been able to go back in time was to maybe have different conversations with our stakeholders about that upstream grading. Because I didn't think any differently than anybody else in the room at the time. Seeing how the river clearly did not want that benching. And when I fly that drone upstream to downstream, or when I just walk the channel, there's nothing that resembles that benching pattern anywhere else in the system. That was not something morphodynamically that the river wants to do. And so it's telling us, I think, what it wants there. So now knowing that, I think for any bridge going forward, something that I encourage our younger engineers to do, I certainly now do myself, is we walk that channel, we fly it. What is the river already doing? There are some things that may not be preferential from a DOT perspective, but what are the things the river's already doing from a geomorphic perspective? And can we work with the landscape instead of trying to convince it to do something different? I think that was a mistake.
What were you trying to achieve with that benching?
Yes, there was a goal there, and the goal was when we lengthened that bridge, the replacement bridge, we could not lengthen closer to the intersection, to the left overbank. That intersection locked us in place grade-wise. So the only way to expand was to go to the right overbank area. So that's the way we lengthened the bridge. That benching, kind of laying back that slope, was to give the river a little bit wider of a conveyance to use that full opening. That's why we did what we did.
Capacity.
For capacity, yes. Much more succinctly said.
One more quick question.
Yes.
How does the sediment supply and so on work in this model, and like it works sort of physically? You know, what do you see in differences as far as what comes out between these branches?
Like as we go to the end of the model, the downstream end of the model, are you asking like
what comes in, what goes out sediment wise? Yeah, how does that work? And does, you know, if you look at what comes out, how does that differ in a different way?
One of the things that we will want to look at as we move forward is, right now we're really looking at the aggradation, the material that's being left behind in the system. One thing that we haven't focused very much on that we will want to do moving forward is, where is it also predicting the erosive potential? Because that will be present also in parts of this model. Our main concern with that balance is, does it replicate both the erosional pattern and the aggradational patterns that the model is routing through here? Are we able to confirm that behavior by what we see on the ground? That's really where our focus is. And Scott's got a comment there.
If you don't give it a supply, like a vegetative flow, you're likely, I assume you're using probably, there's so many upstream reaches at capacity.
Yes, that's
The
correct.
assumption is that at that location it's transporting at capacity.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Did you catch it maybe after we're a little behind time? That's fine. Thank you. All right, thanks, Steve.